The sound you hear is a breath of warm August wind rushing through tall grass. This is the start of Octoberpod. Summer's almost gone. In this part of the country, the weather will likely remain warm through mid-October. But in this county, at least, school starts tomorrow morning. Why, it only seems like yesterday. It was June, and the school doors opened wide, and the new school year was a billion years away. To paraphrase Ray Bradbury, summer with its beach trips, backyard barbecues, fireworks, first loves and heartbreaks flew past us while we weren't looking. Now everyone is in a back-to-school frenzy, buying up all the backpacks, fresh new school outfits complete with stiff blue jeans, solar calculators, number 2 pencils, and trapper keepers that mom and dad's meager paychecks can afford. Do they still make trapper keepers? I can never keep track of what the young people are up to anymore. Here, on this hill, the first day of school is a red-letter day. Indeed, it's the most important day of the year. You see before me, at the bottom of the hill, stand the ruins of an old schoolhouse. It used to be the only school in town, and so all the kids from kindergarten through 12th grade passed through its now crumbling doors. At my feet lie the graves of the town's dead. Nearly all of them former students of the old schoolhouse which nature has reclaimed. Legend has it that at the stroke of midnight, on the eve of the first day of school, the spirits of the dead rise with their books slung over their stooped backs and return to their old classrooms to attend lessons until dawn. It's the one night each year they get the opportunity to live again. It's a sight I've always wanted to see. And so I'm here on this hill, waiting to see if there's any truth to the legend. While we wait, I've prepared a dusk till dawn marathon of classic horror stories to soothe away your back-to-school blues and tide you over until the start of spooky season. Our first tale is a classic ghost story from Scotland and is the true story of the time a young schoolboy encountered the White Lady. The White Lady, from Scottish Ghost Stories, by Elliot O'Donnell. Like most of Europe, Scotland claims its share of phantasms in the form of white ladies, both in reality and fiction. Some years ago, when I was putting up at a friend's house in Edinburgh, I was introduced to a man who had had several experiences with ghosts. He related the following adventure which had befallen him in his childhood in Roanham Avenue near Stirling. I was always a lover of nature, he began, and my earliest boyhood memories are associated with solitary rambles through the fields and dells surrounding my home. I lived within a stone's throw of the property of Sir E.C., who has long gone to rest. God bless his soul, and I think it needs blessing, for if there was any truth in local gossip, he had lived a very queer life. Indeed, he was held in such universal awe and abhorrence that we used to fly at his approach, and never spoke of him amongst ourselves, saving in terms as Old Dour Crib or the Laird Dill. Rowan Manor House, where he lived, was a fine specimen of 16th century architecture, and had it been called a castle, would have merited the appellation far more than many of the buildings in Scotland that bear that name. It was approached by a long avenue of trees, gigantic elms, oaks, and beeches that, uniting their branches overhead in summertime, formed barrier to the sunshine. This avenue had an irresistible attraction for me. It literally swarmed with rabbits and squirrels, and many of the times I trespassed there to watch them. I had a very secure hiding place in the hollow of the old oak, where I have often been secreted while Sir E.C. and his keepers, without casting a glance in my direction, passed unsuspectingly by, vowing all sorts of vengeance against trespassers. But to continue, I'd often heard it rumored in the village that Roanham Avenue was haunted, and that the apparition was a lady in white, and no other than Sir E.C.'s wife, whose death at a very early age had been hastened by her husband's harsh treatment. Whether Sir E.C. was really as black as he was painted, I've never been able to ascertain. The intense animosity with which we all regarded him made us believe anything ill of him, and we were quite ready to attribute all the alleged hauntings in the neighborhood to his past misdeeds. I believe my family, with scarcely an exception, believed in ghosts. Anyhow, the subject of ghosts was so often discussed in my hearing that I became possessed of an ungovernable curiosity to see one. If only the White Lady would appear in the daytime, I thought, I should have no difficulty in satisfying this curiosity, but unfortunately she did not appear until night. In fact, not until long after the boys of my age had been ruthlessly ordered off to bed. Biding my opportunity, and waiting till my father was safely out of the way, on a visit to Greenock, where some business transaction would oblige him to remain for some days, I climbed out of my bedroom window. When I deemed the rest of the household to be sound asleep, scuttled away swiftly across the fields, and making short work of the lofty wall that formed the southernmost boundary of the Roanham estates, quickly made my way to the avenue. It was an ideal Sunday night in August, and hardly a sound broke the exquisite silence of the woods. How long I dallied I do not know, but it must have been fully 1 o'clock before I arrived at the outskirts of the avenue, and, advancing eagerly, ensconced myself in my favorite sanctuary, the hollow oak. All was hushed and motionless, and, as I gazed into the gloom, I became conscious for the first time in my life of a sensation of eeriness. The arched canopy of foliage overhead was strongly suggestive of a funeral pall. Not a glimmer of moonlight penetrated through it, and all beneath seemed to me to be buried in the silence and blackness of the grave. The loneliness got on my nerves. I emerged from my retreat and was preparing to fly through the wood when, from afar off, there suddenly came the sound of a voice, the harsh, grating voice of a man. Convinced this time that I had been discovered by a keeper, I jumped back into the tree and, swarming up the inside of the trunk, peeped cautiously out. What I saw nearly made me jump out of my skin, for advancing along the avenue was the thing I had always longed to see, and for which I had risked so much: the mysterious, far-famed Lady in White, a ghost, an actual, bona fide ghost, the Lady in White. I looked at her closely and noticed that she was entirely luminous, emitting a strong phosphorescent glow, like the glow of a glowworm, saving that it was in a perpetual state of motion. She wore a quantity of white drapery swathed around her in a manner that perplexed me sorely, until I suddenly realized with a creeping of my flesh that it must be a winding sheet, that burial accessory so often minutely described to me by the son of the village undertaker. Streaming over her neck and shoulders were thick masses of long, wavy golden hair, which was ruffled by the gentle summer breeze. Her face, though terrifying by reason of its unearthly pallor, was so beautiful that had not some restraining influence compelled me to remain in hiding, I would have descended from my perch to obtain a nearer view of it. Her eyes were still firmly impressed on my memory. I shall never forget them, and more than I shall forget the dainty curves of her full red lips and the snowy whiteness of her perfect teeth. Nothing, I thought, either in earth or in heaven could have been half so lovely, and I was so enraptured that it was not until she was directly beneath me that I perceived she was not alone, that walking by her side with one arm round her waist, his face and figure illuminated with the light from her body, was Sir E.C. himself. But how changed! Gone were the black scowl, the savage tightening of the jaws, and the intensely disagreeable expression that had earned for him the nickname of the Laird Dale. And in their stead I saw love. Nothing but blind, infatuated, soul-devouring love. Love for which no words can find an adequate description. Throwing discretion to the wind, for my excitement and curiosity had risen to the highest pitch, I now thrust more than half my body out of the hole in the trunk. The next instant, with a cry of dismay, I pitched head first onto the ground. On regaining the few wits I could lay claim to, I fully expected to find myself in the hands of the irate Laird. Too frightened to move, I lay absolutely still with my eyes shut. But as the minutes glided by and nothing happened, I picked myself up. All was quiet and pitch dark. Not a vestige of the lady in white. Not a vestige of Sir E.C. I ran all the way home, and as it was still early, far too early for any of the household to be astir, I crept up to my bedroom unobserved. But not to sleep. Oh, dear me, no. Not to sleep. For the moment I blew the candle out and got into bed, reaction set in, and I suffered agonies of fear. When I went to school in the morning, bubbling over with excitement to tell the boys what had happened, I received another shock. I was told, with a roar and shout that almost broke the drum of my ears, that the old Laird Dale was dead. His body had been found stretched on the ground a few feet from the hollow oak in the avenue shortly after sunrise. He had died from a sudden heart attack, and so the doctor said, that had probably been caused by a shock, some severe mental shock. I did not tell my schoolmates of my night's adventure after all. My eagerness to do so had departed when I heard of the old Laird's death. It's almost midnight. I wonder when the action starts. The ghosts are ready to move. You can feel it in the air, like static electricity before a lightning strike. They should be waking up to start their back-to-school party any moment now. Speaking of waking the dead, our next horror classic from the pen of Edgar Allan Poe serves as an introductory course on how not to wake the dead. Of course, I won't pretend it's no matter for wonder that the extraordinary case of Mr. VALDEMAR has excited discussion. It would have been a miracle had it not, especially under the circumstances. But it has become necessary for me to give the facts, as far as I comprehend them myself. They are succinctly these. The Case of Mr. Valdemar, adapted especially for Octoberpod by John Iger, from the classic tale by Edgar Allan Poe, narrated by Edward October. My area of expertise is mesmerism, and about 9 months ago it occurred to me that of all the experiments I'd studied, no person as yet has been mesmerized in articulo mortis. It remained to be seen, first, whether in such condition the patient responded to mesmeric influences. Secondly, whether mesmerism had any effect in stalling or accelerating death. Thirdly, to what extent and for how long might this process prolong life? My friend, Mr. Ernest Valdemar, the well-known compiler of the Bibliotheca Forensica and author, under the pen name Isaacar Martz, of the Polish versions of Wallenstein and Gargantua, was to be my test subject. Mr. Valdemar, a resident of Harlem, New York, is, or was, particularly noticeable for his extreme and sparse appearance. He had a nervous temperament, which rendered him a good subject for mesmeric experiments. On 2 or 3 occasions I had put him to sleep with little difficulty, but was otherwise disappointed. His will was at no period under my control, and in regard to clairvoyance, I could produce no reliable results. I always attributed my failure at these points to his poor health. For some months previous to my becoming acquainted with him, his physicians had declared he had not long to live. They said he would be fortunate to make it to the end of the year, and even then if all went well. Mr. Valdemar spoke calmly of his approaching death, an outcome neither to be avoided nor regretted. So when the idea for this experiment came to me, it was of course very natural that I should think of Mr. Valdemar. I knew the man well enough to conclude that he'd have no philosophical objection to it, and he had no relatives in the States who would be likely to interfere. I spoke to him frankly upon the subject, and to my surprise, he took an interest. The progression of symptoms for the disease from which he was suffering made it easy to approximate how much longer he had to live. 7 months ago, I got word that his physicians, Dr. D and Dr. F, had agreed that he would not hold out more than 1 more night. Within 3/4 of an hour, I was in the dying man's chamber. I had not seen him for 10 days, and was appalled by the state of him. His face was leaden, the eyes were without luster, and he was so emaciated that the skin had been broken through by the cheekbones. His pulse was barely perceptible. Nevertheless, he retained both his mental power and a certain degree of physical strength. He spoke clearly, and when I entered the room, he was jotting some memoranda in his journal. Doctors D and F were in attendance. After pressing Valdemar's hand, I took his doctors aside and obtained from them a detailed account of the patient's condition. The left lung had been for 18 months in a semi-osseous or cartilaginous state, and was, for all intents and purposes, useless. The right, in its upper portion, was also partially, if not thoroughly, ossified, while the lower region was not much better. They also suspected aneurysm of the patient's aorta. It was the opinion of both physicians that Mr. Valdemar would die at about midnight on Sunday. Before speaking to me, Doctors D and F had bidden their patient a final farewell. It had not been their intention to return, but at my insistence they agreed to look in on him at about 10 o'clock the next night. When they had gone, I spoke freely with Mr. Valdemar about his approaching death and about my proposed experiment. He was still quite willing to participate and urged me to commence at once. I did postpone operations until about 8 the next night. A medical student I trusted, Mr. L, arrived to serve as a reliable witness should any unforeseen accident occur. I'd originally planned to wait until Doctors D and F returned, but Mr. Valdemar insisted that we had not a moment to lose. As a matter of fact, he appeared to be sinking fast. Mr. L agreed to take notes of all that occurred, and the following details come directly from his notes. At 5 minutes to 8, I asked Mr. Valdemar to state for the record that he was willing to undergo the experiment. He said that yes, he wished to be mesmerized, but then added, "But I fear you've deferred it too long." I began the mesmeric passes, which I had already found most effective in subduing him. I exerted all my powers, but no perceptible effect was induced until several minutes after 10 o'clock, when Doctors D and F arrived. I explained the experiment to them, making it clear that the patient had consented to it. They made no objection, saying that the patient was very nearly in the death agony, and so I proceeded without hesitation. I transitioned from making the lateral mesmeric passes to downward ones, and directed my gaze entirely into the right eye of the patient. His pulse was now imperceptible, and his breathing slowed. He remained in this condition for a quarter of an hour. Then a very deep sigh escaped from the dying man, and his extremities turned icy. Just before 11, I was able to produce a tangible mesmeric influence. The glassy roll of the eye changed to an expression of uneasy inward examination, which is quite impossible to mistake. With a few rapid lateral passes, I made the eyelids quiver, and with a few more I closed them altogether. I continued the manipulations until I had completely stiffened the limbs of the patient, after placing them in a comfortable position. When I had accomplished this, it was fully midnight, and I asked the physicians to examine Mr. Valdemar's condition. They concurred that he was in an unusually perfect state of mesmeric trance. Their curiosity was now piqued. Dr. D decided to remain with the patient all night, while Dr. F excused himself and promised to return at daybreak. Mr. L, the nurses, and I also remained. We left Mr. Valdemar entirely undisturbed until about 3 a.m., when I approached him and found him in the same position. The pulse was imperceptible, the breathing was gentle, the eyes were closed naturally, and the limbs were as rigid and as cold as marble. Still, the general appearance was certainly not that of death. "Mr. Valdemar," I said, "are you asleep?" He made no answer, but I noticed a tremor about the lips. I repeated the question until his whole frame began to shiver. His eyelids opened just enough to display a white line of the eyeball. The lips moved sluggishly, and he whispered,
"Yes, asleep now. Do not wake me. Let me die like this."
I felt his limbs and found them as rigid as ever. "Do you still feel a pain in your chest, Mr. Valdemar?"
"No. Pain. I am dying."
I didn't disturb him again until the arrival of Mr. F, who came a little before sunrise, astonished to find his patient still alive. After feeling the pulse, he asked me to speak to him again. I asked, "Mr. Valdemar, do you still sleep?" Several minutes elapsed before a reply was made, and during the interval the dying man seemed to be collecting his energies to speak.
"Yes. Still asleep. Dying."
At this point, the doctors asked that Mr. Valdemar not be disturbed until the moment of his death, or his dissolution, as Dr. F put it, which, given the progression of the patient's symptoms, might be at any moment. Still, I asked him one last time if he was still asleep. While I spoke, a change of expression fell over his face. The eyes rolled open, the pupils disappearing upwardly, the skin became white as paper. The upper lip at the same time writhed itself away from the teeth, and the lower jaw fell open with an audible jerk, leaving the mouth wide enough to offer full view of the swollen and blackened tongue. None of us present were unaccustomed to such deathbed horrors, but so hideous was the appearance of Mr. Valdemar that we all took a step back. I now feel that I've reached a point in this narrative at which every reader will be startled into disbelief. It is my business, however, simply to proceed. There was no longer any sign of life in Mr. Valdemar, and, pronouncing him dead, we let the nurses take over. But they quickly pointed out a strong motion in his tongue. This continued for perhaps a minute, and then came from his motionless jaws a voice so terrifying that I cannot begin to describe it without going mad. The voice seemed to reach our ears, my ears at least, from a vast distance, or from the depths of the cavern far within the earth. Now, I've used the terms sound and voice. What I mean to say is that the sound was both distinct and verbal. Mr. Valdemar spoke, though his mouth did not move, in answer to my question, which was, "Do you sleep?"
Yes. No. I have been sleeping, and now I am dead.
No one there could deny the shuddering horror of those few words. Mr. L., the med student, swooned. The nurses left the chamber, and I was speechless. When Mr. L. recovered, we investigated Valdemar's condition. It was unchanged. There was no pulse and no breath. We tried and failed to draw blood. All attempts at mesmeric commands were futile. The only real indication of the mesmeric influence was a slight vibration of the tongue whenever I asked Valdemar a question. He seemed to be making an effort to reply, but had no energy to do so. I believe that I have now related all that is necessary to understanding Valdemar's state at that moment. A new shift of nurses arrived, and at 10 o'clock I left the house in company with the 2 physicians and Mr. L. From that moment until the close of last week, a period of nearly 7 months, we continued to make daily calls at Mr. Valdemar's house. All this time, the sleep-waker remained exactly as I have last described him, under the supervision of the nurses. Last Friday, we attempted to awaken him, and it is, perhaps, the unfortunate result of this final experiment which has given rise to grotesque discussion in private circles. For the purposes of relieving Mr. Valdemar from his trance, I made the use of the customary passes. These were unsuccessful. At first, early indication of revival included a partial descent of the iris. This lowering of the pupil was accompanied by a flow of a pungent yellow fluid, or ichor as one of the nurses had called it, from beneath the eyelids. Dr. F. suggested I ask a question. I asked, "Mr. Valdemar, can you express your feelings or wishes to us?" The tongue rolled violently in the mouth, although the jaws and lips remained rigid as before, and at length the same hideous voice which I have already described broke forth.
Quick! Quick! For God's sake! Quick! Quick! Put me to sleep! Or quick! Quick! Waken me! Quick! I said to you I'm dead! Quick! Wake me! Quick! For God's sake! Put me to sleep! Quick!
I tried to put the patient back to sleep, but failing in this, I reversed course and struggled to awaken him. None of us were prepared for what happened next.
Dead! 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 Quick! Quick! Put me to sleep! Dead! Dead! Quick! Quick! Waken me! Dead! Dead!
All at once, it had to have happened in less than a minute. Valdemar's body shrank, crumbled, absolutely rotted away beneath my hands. We all looked on in horror as His body melted upon the bed into a gelatinous mass of loathsome, of detestable putrescence. This graveyard on the hill is beautiful on such a bright, moonlit night. It's an ideal night for backpacking if you're into that sort of thing. And what's back to school shopping without getting a new backpack? Sure, the old one's just fine, but each year the books get heavier and Mom worries just a little bit more about the straps being able to hold. Our next tale begins with a backpacking adventure on the moor and ends with a man confronting his destiny. I wanted to be alone. I hastily packed up my knapsack and, taking the train to Westmoreland, I began my tramp in a search of solitude, bracing air, and romantic surroundings. There are many places I might have come upon during that early summer wandering, but fate was driving me to this cottage on the moor, and no man can resist his destiny. One day I found myself on a wide and pathless moor near the sea. I had slept the night before at a small hamlet, but that was already 8 miles behind me, and since I had turned my back upon it, I had not seen any signs of humanity. I was alone with a fair sky above me, a balmy wind blowing over stony, heather-clad mounds, and nothing to disturb my meditations. How far the moor stretched I had no knowledge. I only knew that by keeping a straight line, I could come to the ocean cliffs, then perhaps after a time arrive at some fishing village. I had provisions in my knapsack, and being young, I did not fear a night under the stars. I was inhaling the delicious summer air, and once more getting back the vigor and happiness I had lost. My brains that had been numbed by city life began to wake up. Thus hour after hour slid past me, until I covered about 15 miles since morning, when I saw before me in the distance a solitary, stone-built cottage with roughly slated roof. I quickened my steps towards it, with some vague notion of camping there, if possible. To one in search of a quiet, free life, nothing could have possibly been more suitable than this cottage. It stood on the edge of lofty cliffs, with its front door facing the moor, and the backyard wall overlooking the ocean. The sound of the dancing waves struck upon my ears like a lullaby as I drew near. How they would thunder when strong gales came on and the seabirds fled shrieking to the shelter of the sedges. A small garden spread in front, surrounded by a dry stone wall, just high enough for one to lean lazily upon when inclined. This garden was a flame color, scarlet predominating, with those other soft shades that cultivated poppies take on in their blooming, for this was all that the garden grew. As I approached, taking notice of this singular assortment of poppies and the orderly cleanness of the windows, the front door opened and a woman appeared who impressed me at once favorably, as she leisurely came along the pathway to the gate and drew it back as if to welcome me. She was of middle age and, when young, must have been remarkably handsome. She was tall and still shapely, with smooth, clear skin, regular features, and a calm expression that at once put me at ease. She said she could give me both a sitting and bedroom, and invited me inside to see them. As I looked at her smooth black hair and cool brown eyes, I felt that I would not be too particular about the accommodation. With such a landlady, I was sure to find what I was seeking here. The room surpassed my expectation. Dainty white curtains and bedding, with the perfume of lavender about them. A sitting room, homely yet cozy without being crowded. With a sigh of infinite relief, I flung down my knapsack and clinched the bargain. As she was a widow with one daughter, whom I did not see that first day, as she was unwell and confined to her own room. But on the next day she was somewhat better, and then we met. The meals they served me were simple ones, yet they suited me. Delicious milk and butter with homemade scones, fresh eggs and bacon. After a hearty tea, I went to bed in a condition of perfect content with my quarters. Yet happy and tired out as I was, I had by no means a comfortable night. This I put down to the strange bed. Of course I did sleep, but my sleep was filled with dreams so wild that I woke late and unrefreshed. A good walk on the moor would surely restore me. The loneliness of the moor, with the singing of the ocean, had gripped my heart with a wistful longing. The incongruity of those flaunting and evanescent poppy flowers, dashing the giddy tints in the face of that sober gray heath, touched me with a shiver as I approached the cottage. I'd worked up a fine appetite for breakfast. It was over breakfast that I was introduced to the landlady's daughter, Ariadne. And in that moment I succumbed instantly to her weird charms. She was in somewhat better health this morning and felt well enough to breakfast with me. In fact, we would eat all of our meals together while I was a lodger there. Ariadne was not beautiful in any conventional sense, her complexion being too lividly white and her expression too set to be quite pleasant at first sight. Yet, as her mother had informed me, she had been ill for some time, which accounted for that slight defect. Her features were not regular. Her hair and eyes seemed too black with that strangely white skin, and her lips a trifle too red. Her beauty was more haunting than classical, otherworldly, alien. Ariadne rose from her chair as her mother introduced her, and smiled while she held out her hand for me to clasp, cold and delicate and soft as a snowflake. A faint thrill tingled over me and rested on my heart, stopping for the moment in its beating. This contact seemed also to have affected her as it did me. A clear flush like a white flame lighted up her face so that it glowed. Her black eyes became softer as our glances crossed, and her scarlet lips grew moist. She was a living woman now, while before she had seemed half a corpse. She permitted her slender hand to remain in mine longer than most people do at an introduction, and then she slowly withdrew it, still holding me with steadfast eyes for a second or two afterwards. Fathomless, velvety eyes these were, yet before they were shifted from mine, they appeared to have absorbed all my willpower and made me her abject slave. They looked like deep dark pools of clear water, yet they filled me with fire and deprived me of strength. I sank languidly into my chair, as if in a swoon. Yet I ate a hearty breakfast, and although she hardly tasted anything, this strange girl rose much refreshed, and with a slight glow of color on her cheeks. I had come here seeking solitude, but since I had seen Ariadne, it seemed as if I had come for her only. She was not very lively. She answered my questions in monosyllables, yet she was insinuating and appeared to lead my thoughts in her direction. Indeed, she spoke to me with her eyes. I cannot describe her minutely. I only know that from the first glance and touch she gave me, I was bewitched and could think of nothing but her. It was a rapid, distracting, and devouring infestation that possessed me. All day long I followed her about like a lapdog. Every night I dreamed of that white glowing face, those steadfast black eyes, those moist scarlet lips, and each morning I rose feeling more languid than I had the day before. Sometimes I dreamt that she was kissing me with those red lips, while I shivered at the contact of her silky black tresses as they covered my throat. Sometimes I dreamed that we were floating in the air, her arms about me and her long hair enveloping us both like an inky cloud, while I lay helpless as an infant. Ariadne went with me after breakfast on that first day to the moor, and before we came back I had confessed my love and received her assent. I held her in my arms and had taken her kisses in answer to mine. I never once thought it strange that all this had happened so quickly. She was mine, or rather I was hers, without a pause. I told her it was fate that had sent me to her, for I had no doubts about my love, and she replied that I had restored her to life. Acting upon Ariadne's advice, and also from a natural shyness, I did not inform her mother how quickly matters had progressed between us. Yet, although we both acted as circumspectly as possible, I had no doubt my landlady could see how engrossed we were in each other. Lovers are not unlike ostriches in the clumsiness of their concealment. I was not afraid of asking for Ariadne's hand, so far as social position was concerned. After all, there could be no real objection to our marriage. They lived in this lonely spot for the sake of their health, and kept no servant because they could not get any to take service so far away from other humanity. My coming had surely been opportune and welcome to both mother and daughter. For our decorum, however, I resolved to delay my confession for a week or two, until some favorable opportunity of doing so discreetly presented itself. Meanwhile, Ariadne and I passed the days in the thoroughly idle fashion of a lotus eater. Each night I retired to bed, thirstily drinking down a warm nightcap. It tasted like an exceedingly tart mulled wine, which was always waiting on the bedside table. Each morning I rose languid from the disturbing dreams, with no thought for anything outside my love. Ariadne grew stronger every day, while I appeared to be taking her place as the invalid. Yet I was more frantically in love than ever, and only happy when I was at her side. She was my lone star, my only joy, my life. We did not travel great distances, for I liked best to lie on the dry heath and watch her glowing face and intense eyes while I listened to the surging of the distant waves. Love made me lazy, like a house cat basking in the sunshine. I had been enchanted quickly. My disenchantment came with equal speed, although it was long before the poison left my blood altogether. One night, about a couple of weeks after my coming to the cottage, I returned from a moonlight walk with Ariadne. The night was warm, and the moon full, so I left my bedroom window open to let in what little air there was. I was more fatigued than usual, so much so that I had only strength enough to remove my boots and coat before I flung myself on the coverlet and fell instantly asleep without first tasting the nightcap, which was my usual custom to imbibe. I had a ghastly dream this night. I thought I saw a monster bat with the face of Ariadne fly into the open window and fasten its needle-sharp white teeth and scarlet lips on my arm. I tried to beat the horror away, but could not, for I seemed chained and enthralled in some damnable ecstasy as the beast sucked my blood with a gruesome rapture. I looked out dreamily and saw a line of dead bodies of young men lying on the floor, each with a red mark on their arms, on the same spot where the vampire was then sucking me. In a flash, I understood the reason for my strange weakness, and at the same moment, a sudden prick of pain roused me from my dreamy pleasure. The vampire, in her eagerness, had bitten a little too deeply that night, unaware that I had not consumed the drug that had been dissolved in my nightcap. As I woke, I saw her fully revealed by the moonlight, with her black tresses flowing, tangled with gore, her red lips glued to my arm. With a shriek of horror, I dashed her backwards, getting one last glimpse of her savage eyes, glowing white face, and blood-stained red lips. It's intermission time, folks. I'm your host, Mr. Edward October. You still have a few moments to visit the snack bar before Act 2 of Octoberpod begins. This intermission is brought to you by our friends at Rey Market Plaza and the Greene County Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Back to school is right around the corner. Stock up on everything you need at the Rey Market Plaza on Old Spanish Highway. Visit the restaurants and boutiques of the Rey Market Plaza to find all your shopping, dining, fun and fair prices to make your back-to-school shopping trip a breeze. Pop into Rosie's Rag Patch to buy the latest fashions and accessories to give your kids a fresh new look this school year. Now, through September 1st, Rosie is offering 50% off select boys' tops, 15 to 20% off casual slacks, girls' dresses, half off the original ticket price, and Rambler jeans for the whole family. Looking for school supplies? Spunkmeyer's Pharmacy has all the gear you need to put you in the head of the class. Spunkmeyer's has the largest selection of Clapper Keeper brand binders, lunchboxes, and thermoses in Greene County. Choose from your favorite cartoon and comic strip characters, including Nutso, Captain Demeter, Lady Skunk Ape, and more. Getting hangry from all that shopping? Well, Humburgers will have you singing a different tune. Receive 10% off your Aria Burger combo meal with your purchase of the Clapper Keeper or lunchbox from Spunkmeyer's Pharmacy, or receive 20% off any Lento box meal with your purchase of Rambler jeans from Rosie's Rag Patch. Limit 1 per customer. Proof of purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Find all this and more at Rey Market Plaza on Old Spanish Highway. This year, make Rey Market Plaza your back-to-school headquarters.
Last call, folks. Why not satisfy your cravings with a sizzling hot dog with chili, mustard, and onions, and all your favorite fixins? Give your evening a south-of-the-border flair with crispy nachos, with spicy jalapenos, and smooth, creamy, and oh-so-cheesy queso quesadilla cheese. Popcorn is always a crowd pleaser. Get yours freshly popped and drenched in real movie theater butter. Wash it down with a sparkling, ice-cold soda. Got a sweet tooth? Satisfy it now with our taste-tempting assortment of candy, ice cream, and confections. Or take the edge off with a good smoke. Our courteous refreshment stand staff has all your favorite cigarettes on hand. Whatever you choose, better get it quick, because Act 2 of Octoberpod starts now. Welcome back, folks. I'm your host, Mr. Edward October. I'm standing in a moonlit graveyard on a hill overlooking an abandoned schoolhouse. Generations of the townsfolk went to this school before it fell into ruin. Well, school is back in session, and the inhabitants of these graves have risen from the earth like vapor. They have their books, they have their notebooks and pencils, and they're slowly making their way to class. They have until dawn to live again, to be school children again, to laugh and love and learn again. While these restless souls make their back-to-school pilgrimage, let's listen to another story. You know, when I was a boy, the teachers would sometimes roll out a projector and a cassette tape player. Narration would accompany each slide, and when you'd hear a specific beep, that was your cue to advance to the next slide. We also had those read-along storybook records. You know, the kind where you'd listen to a narrator reading the story on a record or tape while following along in the illustrated book. From time to time, you'd hear a sound effect reminding you to turn the page. Our next classic horror story was adapted for Octoberpod with those storybook and record sets in mind. Enjoy.
Hop Frog and Trippetta. You can follow along in the book. When you hear this sound, it's time to turn the page. Let's begin. Long ago, there was a kingdom which few can now remember. The ruler of this realm was a king who enjoyed a joke more than anyone. The king and his ministers were all accomplished jokers, and they were all large, oily men. The king didn't care for witty jokes so much. No, the king's tastes were better suited to practical jokes. In those days, professional jesters were quite fashionable at court. Several of these fools wore motley with caps and bells, and were expected to always be ready with sharp wit. And they, of course, were rewarded with the crumbs that fell from the royal table. The king's fool was a strange little dwarf named Hop Frog. Dwarves were common at court in those days, and the royalty loved to laugh at them. Of course, Hop Frog was not his real name. It was a nickname he earned because he walked with a limp that resembled a sort of hop and wriggle that amused the king and his court to no end. But in spite of Hop Frog's twisted legs, he had incredibly strong arms, which enabled him to climb and caper about like a squirrel or a small monkey. No one knows what country Hop Frog came from. I'm sure it was some savage region that no one has ever heard of. Hop Frog and a young girl named Trippetta, who was not quite so small as himself, had been stolen away from their homes by a courageous general and delivered as presents to the king. Naturally, Hop Frog and Trippetta became close friends. Hop Frog was always the butt of a joke, but Trippetta, although a dwarf, was universally admired and petted upon due to her grace and beauty. This gave her some measure of influence, which she always used to Hop Frog's benefit. On some grand occasion, I forget what, the king threw a masquerade, which required the talents of both Hop Frog and Trippetta. Hop Frog was great at making masked balls even more fun. Finally, the night of the masquerade arrived. Trippetta was in charge of decorating the great hall. The king's ministers and other honored guests waited until the last minute to decide upon their characters and costumes. And so, Hop Frog and Trippetta were employed to help costume them all. The king summoned the two little friends to his table, where he sat with 7 members of his council. "Come, Hop Frog," cried the king. "Help us be merry. We're bored of the same old jests. We want characters. Characters, man, something novel. Come and have some wine. It will brighten your wit. Drink to absent friends." It happened to be the poor dwarf's birthday, and the command to drink to his absent friends brought tears to his eyes as he took the cup from the hand of the tyrant.
"Ha!" roared the king. "See what a good wine can do. Your eyes are shining already."
Poor, sad Hop Frog. His eyes moist with tears, he placed the cup nervously on the table and looked about the room with a funny, crazed look on his face. "I've just thought of a novel jest," said the dwarf in a bit of a daze.
"Excellent," roared the king. "But first have some more wine."
And he poured another goblet to the dwarf, who merely stared at it with dread, for it was well known that Hop Frog disliked drinking.
"Drink, I say," shouted the monster, "or by the fiends—"
The dwarf hesitated. The king grew purple with rage. The courtiers smirked. Trippetta, pale as a corpse, advanced to the monarch's seat, and, falling on her knees before him, implored him to spare her friend. The tyrant regarded her for some moments in evident wonder at her audacity. He seemed quite at a loss what to do or say, how most becomingly to express his indignation. At last he pushed her violently from him and threw the wine in her face. The poor girl got up the best she could, and, not daring even to sigh, resumed her position at the foot of the table. There was a dead silence for about half a minute, during which the falling of a leaf or of a feather might have been heard. It was interrupted by a low but harsh, grating sound, which seemed to come at once from every corner of the room.
"What are you making that noise for?"
demanded the king, turning furiously to Hop Frog. And now the dwarf laughed. The king was too confirmed a joker to object to anyone's laughing, and displayed a set of large, powerful teeth, and now he began to swallow as much wine as desired. "Just after your majesty had struck the girl and thrown the wine in her face," said Hop Frog, "I remembered a frolic from my native land, often enacted among us at our masquerades. But here it will be new altogether. Unfortunately, however, it requires 8 persons."
"Here we are,"
cried the king, laughing at his acute discovery of the coincidence.
"What is the jest?"
"We call it," replied the dwarf, "the 8 chained orang-utans, and it really is excellent sport, if well enacted."
"We will enact it,"
remarked the king, drawing himself up. "The beauty of the game," continued Hop Frog, "lies in the way it frightens the ladies."
"Capital!"
roared in chorus the monarch and his ministry. "I will dress you as orang-utans," said Hop Frog. "The resemblance shall be so striking that the masqueraders will take you for real beasts. And, of course, they will be as much terrified as astonished."
"Oh, this is exquisite!" exclaimed the king. "Hop Frog, I will make a man of you yet."
"The chains will jangle and cause confusion. You are supposed to have escaped from your keepers. Just imagine 8 chained orang-utans, imagined to be real ones, rushing about with savage cries among civilized ladies and gentlemen." Hop Frog disguised the men as orang-utans, using a simple method. In those days, few people in this kingdom had ever seen a real orang-utan, and such people were easy to fool. The king and his ministers were wrapped in tight-fitting shirts and breeches, and then soaked with tar. Hopfrog then applied a thick coating of flax to represent the hair. Then the dwarf took a long chain and wrapped it around the waist of the king, and tied, and then passed around to the ministers next to him, and so on. Then Hopfrog seized the remaining chain and led
The orang-utans.
as if on a leash. The masquerade was held in the circular grand salon. At night, this lofty room was illuminated by a large chandelier hanging from a chain and counterbalance system that passed outside the cupola and over the roof. Trippetta had overseen the arrangements of the room. She had the chandelier removed. The room was instead lit by sconces and some 50 or 60 other freestanding braziers and candelabrum. According to Hopfrog's instructions,
The orang-utans.
waited until midnight, when the room would be full of masqueraders, before making their appearance. When the clock struck 12, they rushed in all together. Many of them tripped over the chains and stumbled or fell. Many of the guests supposed them to be beasts of some kind. Many of the ladies swooned with fear. A general rush was made for the doors, but the king had ordered them locked, and the keys had been given to Hopfrog. The chain by which the chandelier ordinarily hung slowly descended until the hook at one end hovered 3 feet above the door. The king and his 7 friends were soon in contact with the chandelier chain. While assisting with the jest, Hopfrog crept among them unnoticed and hooked their chain to the one which hung from the ceiling. The masqueraders, now convinced they had been deceived, began to laugh. "Leave them to me," now screamed Hopfrog. "I think I know them. If I can only get a good look at them, I can soon tell who they are." He scrambled over the heads of the crowd and seized a torch. He returned, leaping and capering, and examined them in the light of the guttering flame. "I shall soon find out who they are." And now the room was filled with laughter, and the jester uttered a shrill whistle. Now the chandelier chain flew up 30 feet, dragging with it the struggling suspended in the skylight and the floor. Hopfrog, clinging to the chain as it rose, thrust his torch down toward them. The silence, which had settled upon the masquerade when the chain ascended, was broken by the low, harsh, grating sound that the king had heard after throwing wine in the face of Trippetta. But now it was obvious that it was the sound of the dwarf grating and gnashing his teeth. Hopfrog held the torch to the king's flaxen disguise, which then burst into a vivid flame. In an instant, all 8 were blazing amid the shrieks of the masqueraders below, who were helpless to offer them aid. At length, the flames forced the jester to climb higher up the chain. "I now see distinctly," cried the jester, "what manner of people these are. They are a great king and his 7 counselors. A king who does not hesitate to strike a defenseless girl, and his 7 counselors who are complicit in the outrage. As for myself, I am simply Hopfrog the jester, and this is my last jest. The 8 charred corpses swung in their chains, fetid, blackened, hideous, an indistinguishable mass of putrescence. Hopfrog hurled his torch at them and climbed to the ceiling, then disappeared through the skylight. And so, Hopfrog and Trippetta fled to their own country, and they lived happily ever after.
That rusty schoolhouse bell is in such a state of disrepair that it's physically impossible for it to ring. And yet, I bet you can hear it ringing for miles. The ghosts are in their seats now, and school, for them at least, for just this one night, is back in session. Primary school kids aren't the only ones heading back to school soon. I dare say that college students are packing up their cars with laundry baskets full of bric-a-brac and formulating plans to hit up the local Target or IKEA to buy cheap plastic housewares to furnish their dorm rooms. They'll probably need to hit the ShopRite so they can stock up on instant ramen and cheap beer. Our next classic horror, which was inspired by true accounts and by a story from Weird Tales magazine, was produced especially for all you dorm dwellers out there.
Every college or university worth its salt has 1 or 2 good spook stories attached to it, and all spook stories contain a grain of truth. University, where I completed my master's degree a lifetime ago, is no exception.
The QUIERLING Encounter, adapted especially for Octoberpod by John Iger. The tale you are about to hear is based upon various true ghost stories. It also borrows some elements suggested by The Jellyfish, written by David H. Keller, and originally published in the January 1929 edition of Weird Tales, narrated by Tara Voshell, co-host of 3 Spooked Girls.
The big bad boogeyman on that campus is the mysterious Dr. QUIERLING. When I was there, nobody seemed to know who exactly Dr. QUIERLING was, or why his name was attached to all that was morbid and half of everything mysterious at that school, but his presence was always felt. Example: there was a lecture hall that the university had converted into a black box theater where students would stage their own productions, or where the English department would hold poetry slams and the like. But before that, it was where Dr. QUIERLING would hold most of his lectures. It was connected to one of the science buildings via a little-known, seldom-used maintenance tunnel, and if you knew how to find it, the door was never locked. It was a great place to escape if you ever needed to pull an all-nighter cramming for an exam or grinding out an essay in peace. The walls and the floors were black, and the backstage area was concealed by a black curtain. I was dating this cute little theater major, and she refused to step a foot inside of that place. She said the last time she was there, she was turning on the lights, and she said she saw the black shape of a man concealed in the folds of the black curtain. She said she might never have seen him if it weren't for his eyes. They were pure white with no pupils, no iris. They seemed to glow, and she had convinced herself that if she stared into them, they'd put her in some sort of trance. So she hauled ass out of the former lecture hall and never went back there. When I asked what she thought she'd seen, she said she was certain that it was the ghost of Professor QUIERLING. Everybody on that campus had their own story about a QUIERLING encounter, one that had happened to them firsthand, or one that had happened to a friend, or a friend of a friend. Dr. Marvin QUIERLING had a metaphysical interest in the expansion of the human consciousness for the purpose of exploring regions man could not physically visit. He had written books on the subject, but they were now all out of print. I'd heard recordings of his lecture, and it was weird stuff. His expertise was esoteric, but the legend that grew about him was closely tied to the circumstances of his death and to a strange accident that occurred during one of his lectures. I could never find out what exactly had happened in this now legendary lecture. I asked several people, even the members of the faculty and the administration, but I could never get a straight story that made any sense. And then one night I was out drinking with some friends, then I was introduced to an alum who had actually attended that lecture. QUIERLING was a miserable bastard, and all of his students hated him, he had said. Every last one. He was such a condescending prick to everyone, and he'd always get off on the weirdest tangents during his lectures. And I'm like, my brother in Christ, we're just aspiring social workers. How is any of this shit gonna help us in our careers? He has the reputation for being some mad genius, but he was just a toxic, narcissistic douchebag with his head hopelessly trapped inside his own ass. Anyway, he kept going on and on about mental projection and how mankind could project human consciousness out into space, or into the cellular structure of a malignant tumor, or to the bottom of the ocean, as a means of exploration. This one day, it must have been about 12 years ago now, we came into the lecture hall and he said he had a thought experiment for us. But the thought experiment looked more like a guided meditation than anything else. It's kind of hard to explain. I don't remember a lot of the details on how he did it. I just remember that he had used hypnotic suggestion to convince the whole class that we'd project our minds into the deep ocean trench to study microscopic sea creatures. It sounds crazy, I know, but all of us were convinced that we had astral projected or whatever to the bottom of the ocean. I still have memories of looking at a microscopic jellyfish thing up close, as if I had shrunk down to its size. I know it sounds goofy as hell, but it was so real to all of us. The whole thing ended when he started laughing at us. I mean, he started calling us a bunch of damned fools and said we were the sorriest class of psych students he ever taught. He did all that, got into our heads, and fucked around with our thoughts using the power of suggestion just to make fools out of us. I cannot explain to you the impact that whole thing has had on my mental health. I've been in therapy off and on ever since. I asked him why nobody sued QUIERLING or the school after they sent people into therapy. Surely there was a case to be made for mental anguish. He tossed back the last of his beer and said, "You'd think that, but we had to sign a waiver before we could enroll into his class. Something about having to give express consent due to a highly unorthodox and experimental nature of the subject matter, yada yada, etc., etc. And when you read the fine print, the form releases the university as a whole and QUIERLING personally from any and all legal liability should any personal injury, both mental and physical, occur. On top of that, QUIERLING has tenure, so he was impossible to fire." A number of QUIERLING legends suggest that the professor used his powers of mental projection to try to communicate with the dead. I never gave these stories much credence because, well, they sounded like something from a Saturday matinee spooky show. That was when I went with my friend Kaylee to a small poetry reading being held at the home of Dr. Bishop, my friend's contemporary lit professor. Kaylee and I were among the first to show up. It was kind of weird milling around this professor's house, sipping from plastic champagne flutes while they were getting ready for more people to arrive. This old woman came up to us and said, "Hi, I'm so-and-so," and we shook her hand, not realizing she was this famous award-winning poet whose poems we were about to hear. I was so embarrassed for not making a big deal out of meeting her. Anyway, we made awkward small talk with the poet when a little girl came up to us. She was the daughter of Dr. Bishop. The poet, looking for a reason to break off from the two of us, began chatting with this little girl. She was asking her about the house, asking her about the room, etc. The poet pointed to a room just off the main living room. The heavy antique door to this room was padlocked, and the poet asked the little girl what room that was. The girl, who had been bubbly and cheerful the whole time, went really quiet. You could almost see the color drain from her face. And she said, "That's Marvin's room. There's bad people in there." And then she scampered away. The three of us shrugged and didn't have a chance to react because Dr. Bishop and a bunch of people from the Modern Languages department walked into the room and we got swept up into the poetry reading. The event devolved into a casual hangout with Dr. Bishop and a handful of English majors and a couple bottles of wine. For the life of me, I don't know how Kaylee kept me at this event so long. I must have been buzzed because I didn't have it in me to talk poetry and literature all night long. But at some point, the poet asked Dr. Bishop about the padlocked room and told him what his daughter had said. Dr. Bishop made a funny expression on his face and said, "Oh, this used to be the house where our school resident boogeyman used to live." I asked if he meant Dr. Quierling, and he nodded ominously and said, "Yes, indeed. This used to be Martin Quierling's house, and that," he dropped his voice to a whisper, in case his daughter could hear, "that is the room where he died." Now, all of us, even the famous poet, were so curious that we begged Dr. Bishop to tell us everything he knew about the mysterious Dr. Quierling. "I don't know if any of this is true," he said after finishing his plastic cup of wine, "but I'll tell you what I know. My daughter thinks this place is haunted, especially that room. And I'm not sure I blame her. When our lease is up, we'll probably move. Dr. Quierling died about 10 years ago, long before I started teaching here. The last of my colleagues who knew him and worked with him just retired at the end of last semester. But here's what I know. He was a theoretical psychologist interested in the mind's potential to experience and influence the physical world outside one's physical body. Astral projection, talking to the dead, you know, the whole 9 yards. Personally, it sounds like he's a quack. Professionally, I've heard stories that make me believe he was an awful teacher who ran a very toxic classroom." Dr. Bishop was a little reluctant to talk about the little room and about how Quierling died, but we all pressured him to spill the tea. "That room," he says, was Dr. Quierling's office. More than that, his astral projection chamber. Now, I don't have any facts about his death, but from what I've heard, he died of suicide. Some people say he slit his wrists and that his blood still stains the floorboards beyond that locked door. Some say it was a drug overdose. I even had one lady swear to me that he hanged himself somehow. I can't say, but everyone I've spoken to said that he left a note and the contents of that note implied very heavily that he had been conducting an experiment on himself. I heard it was an astral projection gone wrong, and I've also heard he was trying to commune with spirits. Whatever it was, and whatever he wrote in that note, it terrified him. It terrified him enough to take his own life. Then the room fell quiet. One of Dr. Bishop's students said she heard that Quierling had summoned ghosts, and that these restless spirits invaded the house and made Quierling do it. As different as all those stories are, Dr. Bishop said, all of the stories agree on one thing. The last line of Quierling's suicide note contained the phrase, "The bad people are here." The poet, who hadn't spoken at all through Dr. Bishop's tale, piped up and asked if she could see the inside of the room. Dr. Bishop said that was quite impossible. "Believe me," he said, "I'd love to have a good look myself, but I've never even opened the door. The padlock is the landlord's doing, and the landlord has the only key." So, all of that remains a legend, and it's anyone's guess what he saw, or what he thought he saw.
The sky is getting lighter at the horizon. Our back-to-school spooks are making their melancholy way back to the grave to sleep off another year, or more. Man, look at that view. You can see the whole town sleeping below. There's a drive-in theater not far from here, and from where I'm standing, there's a great view of the screen. I wonder if the poor souls buried here ever sneak out of their graves to watch the Late Late Show. Of course, back to school usually means the end of summer for the drive-ins. Sure, they'll remain open on weekends while the weather's still warm, but all the seasonal help they've hired, high school and college students mostly, will likely start to jump ship. The warm, glittering, golden hours of another summer will soon slip through our fingers like so many grains of beach sand. Speaking of the drive-in, I think we've got time for one more classic horror story before the cock crows. Our final tale, inspired by The Phantom of the Opera, just so happens to take place at a drive-in movie theater. As for me, I'll be back in 2 weeks with more retro horror for all of you bold individualists out there. Until then, stay spooky, mes amis. All that really remains of the old Viceroy is its big movie screen. Now, of course, it's rusty and neglected with a peeling, decade-old billboard for a clothing boutique called Rosie's Rag Patch plastered to it. A faded yard sign, "Re-elect Joe Butch Devlin, Greene County Sheriff," juts out of the tall grass just next to it. Folding tables laid out with antiques, treasures, and just plain junk from cellars all over the Tri-County region occupy spaces where families would go to watch a movie inside their car. A few of the old speaker posts remain, and the crackly Art Deco speakers are used to announce flash sales, children who've gotten separated from their parents, lost and found items, and raffle winners. Yet amidst all the haggling, the smells of fried dough from the churro truck, and the cries of toddlers who want a balloon, one can feel the ghosts of a bygone era moving silently like a breath of summer wind through the crowd. One doesn't need an opera house to have a phantom. The Phantom of the Viceroy Drive-In, written by M.J. McAdams from an original idea by Edward October, and inspired by the novel The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux.
All it took was the scent of wet grass at the flea market. Ordinary, dew-covered grass trampled and mashed into moist soil underneath, and the memories came flooding back to me. It was summertime. I was home from college and working at the Viceroy to save up enough money to live on for the following semester. My name is Christine, and this is the sound of my voice. The Viceroy was owned by Mr. and Mrs. Geary, who were friends of my mom and dad, so it was easy to get seasonal work there. Like most drive-in theaters, the Viceroy was only open during the warm months. My summer break began sooner and lasted longer than Greene County schools, so the first and last week or two of my break, the drive-in was only open on weekends. But when all the little kiddies were back home from school, it was open every night, Tuesday through Sunday. Those were long, back-breaking nights. I worked concessions, like most of the help, and I remember slinging so much popcorn that sometimes I'd sit up in bed and bag imaginary popcorn in my sleep. It was pretty monotonous work. Well, until the Phantom appeared.
He was our local boogeyman. Well, he was before Emilio Vasquez, but that's a different story. My name is Darcy, and this is the sound of my voice.
Drive away your worries and cares at this historic drive-in, the Viceroy Drive-In Theater. Family owned and operated since 1954. We have a wonderful program lined up for you tonight, so relax in the comfort of your own vehicle and come back often.
I was into my second week at the drive-in, the first time I saw him. Lucky me. The Viceroy was off the main highway, but it was just at the edge of town, and just a short walk away from a dense patch of woods. Growing up, I'd heard all sorts of crazy stories of what went on in those woods, and that summer, I found out that none of that changed.
My name is Meg, and this is the sound of my voice. Christine and Darcy were my shift buddies. We'd be cutting up all through the intermission rush, and by the end of the night, we'd be covered in popcorn butter and powdered sugar from churros and funnel cakes. After our shift, when everyone had gone and we'd close up, the three of us would linger by our cars and hang out to shoot the shit. Employees parked away from the main lot in a grassy area just on the edge of the woods. Now let me be clear for a moment. Those woods were always crawling with more tails than the trees had leaves. Ghosts, cryptids, cults, and killers, you name it. Hangman's Grove had it all. That's what people around here called it. That's not the official name, but after an old man hung himself back there, well, the name stuck.
The story of the Viceroy Drive-In Phantom is always a little bit different depending on who you ask. Some say he was once a child that went missing in the woods and never left. Others say he was abandoned there as a newborn and raised by the animals there, or by some unknown creature. Some folks swear he's not human at all, our very own local spook, doomed to walk the woods forevermore.
Now, I don't know about all that, but I do know that whatever he was as real as you are. He'd never seemed dangerous before. I always assumed he was some hermit or one of them homeless folk that set up camp in the woods. And if he was some sort of spirit, he was a mild poltergeist at best. He mostly just caused trouble. Snacks would disappear from the concession stand if it was left unattended. Lights would flicker. Stuff like that.
Some people swore that a hand would go around knocking on cars' doors if the folks inside were making out. Then they would look around only to find no one was there.
But I know for a fact that this kid, Lonnie Davis, would go around knocking on doors to prank any of his friends who were getting some action. And then turn around and blame the Phantom. So don't listen to everything you hear. But his pranks were mostly harmless. They called the law out multiple times, but the Phantom would vanish without a trace, so there wasn't much they could do. Finally, they hired Sheriff Devlin's son, Raoul, to work as a security guard and do patrols during the movies. He was a good guy, and he was the sheriff's kid, and he was big and fit, and used to play football. But even with all that, I still don't know what they expected him to do about the Phantom. Most times, he just found excuses to hover around Christine.
The co-owner was superstitious and thought that the Phantom was a ghost or a revenant or something. She started leaving offerings to appease him, to make sure he wasn't too active. She'd leave care packages for him at the edge of the woods. Nothing crazy. Food from concession, magazines, books, or little trinkets she would find. They had this unspoken agreement that he would behave if these offerings kept being made.
But after Christine started working with us, the Phantom began leaving roses. The biggest, reddest roses I've ever seen. He left one on Christine's old beat-up Ford before the end of her shift. Just a single rose each time. At first, I thought it was Raoul. He's always been sweet on her. But when I confronted him about it, he acted just as surprised as I was. Then, one night, we saw him.
He was just standing there, staring at me with these dark, empty eyes. None of us had ever seen him before. He was taller than I expected and wore a long, shabby coat. His hair was slicked back, not a strand out of place. It was the neatest thing about him, but not the strangest. The strangest thing was the carved wooden mask that concealed the top half of his face, the golden paint chipping away around the edges. The painted face reminded me of those Greek theater masks we studied in school. Beautiful, but eerie. Unsettling, even. He was like a statue that came to life. No, not quite like a statue. Like a wooden totem. I had thought that Raoul was leaving me those pretty flowers. He knew roses were my favorite, and secretly I was hoping it was him. And then this oogie feeling of horror washed over me when I realized they weren't from him. Meg and I were leaving late one Saturday night. Darcy didn't work that shift. And as we reached the employee parking lot, I saw him. Looking back now, he had always been so careful not to be seen. But that night, it was different. That night, the Phantom wanted me to know that he was my admirer. I watched him place the pristine rose on the hood of my truck. He handled it as carefully as you'd handle an infant, and then he turned to meet my gaze. I was frozen where I stood. Meg was beside me, freaking out and rummaging through her bag for some mace, but the sound seemed muffled to me as I watched the phantom, almost entranced by him. He put a finger to his lips, gave a low bow, and vanished. I must have stared at that rose all night when I got home, though at the time, I couldn't quite say why.
My name is Raoul Devlin, and this is the sound of my voice. We moved here from Charleston when I was in 5th grade. I went to school with all them Viceroy girls, and even then there were stories about the Phantom. He was known as the Phantom of Hangman's Grove until he took a liking to Christine, and that was the first time I ever found him frightening.
Attention lovebirds. The management would like me to remind you that or engaging in any acts of are strictly prohibited. Lewd behavior and explicit displays of affection will not be tolerated. Enough said.
He killed Carlotta Hernandez. I know that. I didn't want to admit it at the time, but who would? No one wants to be the reason that someone gets hurt, let alone murdered. I know what people said, what they will say, but I never asked him to do it. I mean, she was a bitch to me, but she was still a human being. She still was someone's mother, and she was still someone's little girl. Carlotta, everyone called her Lottie, was a mean girl. She bullied me back in high school, and she hadn't changed much as an adult. I'll admit that when I found out she worked at the drive-in, I almost turned down the job. But college is expensive, and living isn't much cheaper. So, I learned to tolerate her. She did everything she could to make me miserable there. It was like being 14 all over again. She'd yell and nag at me, leaving me with the dirtiest jobs to do. Gossip about me with regulars and start nasty rumors that made the locals give me a never-ending supply of dirty looks. Then one night, she took things a little too far.
Oh my god, that night was hell on earth. We did a midnight to dawn triple feature of Orphan, Midnight Meat Train, and Faces of Death. I mean, those movies, woof. Now, the Midnight Madness was different. We played our normal family-friendly feature first, and then there was an intermission, and the families with kids left, and then the freaks came out for the midnight shows. Mr. and Mrs. Geary ran the box office and the projector during the family feature. Then the Gearys would close up the box office around 20 minutes after midnight and go home. They put Raoul at the front gate, making sure nobody snuck in after the box office closed. And they moved Lottie off the concessions register and put her up in the booth to run the projector for the spook shows. So yeah, Lottie was her typical shitty self during her shift at concessions. A snide comment here, an insult there, and the occasional dash of attitude to top it all off.
What can I say? She was a, bitch. But even I didn't expect her to take things that far. She's always been jealous of Christine and did everything she could to make her look bad. Even now that they were older, Carlotta was hell-bent on embarrassing her, running her out of town or whatever. Lottie was dating one of Christine's exes, this loser named Craig. Craig had saved some risque photos of Christine from back in the day.
Craig had naked pictures of my girl Christine on his phone, and when Lottie found them, she went bug fuck on Craig and Christine. So of course, that night goes on as usual, except when the previews before Orphan start rolling, the show cuts off without warning. The only reason Christine and I noticed was because everybody started hollering from inside their cars and flashing their lights and blowing their horns. I ran out with Christine and Darcy to see what was going on, and that's when those naked photos of Christine flashed up on the screen.
As you can imagine, the unruly crowd started whistling and shouting some pretty crude stuff. I'll never forget the expression on poor Christine's face. She was mortified. Meg ran up to the projection booth to shut it off because she was the only one, aside from Lottie, who knew how to operate it. And as she did, she pressed Carlotta, laughing her ass off. She shoved her out of the way, and Lottie spilled her slush puppy all over the front of her shirt. She got the movie back up and running, but the damage was done. I was furious. Poor Christine was hiding in the ladies' room sobbing. When I went to check on her, I saw a single red rose waiting just outside the bathroom stall, right on the handle.
We knew something was wrong. Bad wrong. After I fixed the projector, I ran back out to find Lottie, but she was nowhere in sight. Truth be told, I was looking to beat her ass. I went to the employee lot, you know, where we all parked up in the grass, looking for her shitty little Honda. After all that running around, I calmed down and went back to the projection booth. I mean, if Lottie wasn't running the movies, somebody was going to have to do it. And when I stretched my hand out to open the door, I felt like a crackle of static electricity telling me that something awful had happened. As soon as I opened the door, I found her.
I get that no one liked Carlotta Hernandez, least of all me. She was the popular girl who peaked in high school and was now stuck in her small town she always thought she'd outgrow. Mr. and Mrs. Geary hired her more out of pity than anything. It was the kids, I think. She had 2 kids straight out of high school. That's 2 mouths to feed when no one wanted them suffering because their mother lacked basic life skills. She was used to being the pretty one that just skated through life without a care. But you know, pretty only gets you so far. What she did to Christine that night was inexcusable. If I had known, I'll never forgive her for hurting Christine. That's true. She didn't deserve to die, though. I had been hanging out at the front gate in the box office and was just about to head up to the concession stand when Darcy ran down to get me. When I got up the hill, I saw Meg frantically pacing by the stairs to the projection room. At first, I couldn't get a coherent word out of her. She was in shock. I told Darcy to call my dad and have him send a squad car out and an ambulance. I crept into the projection booth, only to check if Lottie was still alive. I knew CPR, and if there was a chance I could help her, well, I wanted to help, but quickly realized that wouldn't be an issue. She was on the floor near the projector, but she was barely recognizable. Her face was frozen in a permanent scream, lips blue and eyes bulging. Her hands were bloody like she'd been clawing something desperately at her attacker and her throat. She'd been strangled with a thick ribbon of film. Movie film.
By 2009, the Viceroy had switched over to digital projection, and all the pictures were screened that night were digital projections, except for one. We had Faces of Death on 35mm film and had to project it on the analog projector, the old-fashioned way. And that's the film they found around Lottie's neck. I have no idea how the Phantom made her body appear unnoticed in the projection booth in the short time I was away from it, and I told Raoul's daddy the same thing.
Christine came up the steps not long after I came on the scene. I told Meg or Darcy to babysit her, but I guess that didn't take. She was pale and in a daze. I kept her away from the projection booth, just like everyone else. Just like everybody else, because it was now a crime scene. Seems like I waited forever for my dad to show up with a couple of deputies in an ambulance. But as I turned her away to send her back down to where Meg and Darcy were waiting, my stomach dropped. She was clutching a single red rose to her chest, clutching it with a tight, white knuckle grip. Now I can't say if it was my imagination or if the dim shadows on the lot playing tricks on me, but I swear I saw the faintest hint of a smile on her lips.
It was just awful. Lottie made my life hell whenever she could, but no one deserves to die like that. Though, and I know this is horrible to say, I don't miss her. I know it's not right, but it's the truth. Raoul drove me home that night. I was staying with Mom and Dad during the break, but they were away on a long cruise and I didn't want to be alone, so Raoul stayed with me. We talked and watched movies. He tried to make me laugh, and even made eggs when the sun came up. He was always the sweetest. I felt safer with him than ever, and I was truly thankful to have Raoul with me. But here's the thing. I never felt as though I was in danger. I felt shitty, yes, but afraid for my own safety? Not really. The phantom scared me at first, but I soon realized that I should be the last person worried about him. Everything he did was for me. He was like my guardian angel in a sort of twisted way. Anyways, the theater was closed for a little over a week for the investigation, and out of respect for Lottie's family. No new evidence was ever found except a bit of blood, some fingerprints that didn't match any records, and a few slim flakes of gold paint, just like the Phantom's mask. Everyone suspected it was the Phantom after all, though most wouldn't say it out loud. But they didn't have to. Police had been permanently set up at the Viceroy, taking shifts all day and into the night to ensure if the Phantom did come back, he'd be swiftly apprehended. Sheriff Devlin encouraged Mrs. Geary to keep leaving him her little offerings to try and bait him. But he never came. He was much too smart for that. Time went on, and soon Raoul and I started going out again. My parents had planned to be away for the rest of the summer, and, he started staying over more frequently. Things started going back to normal around town, and Raoul became my new normal. We even started talking about moving in together after I graduated. But then I saw the Phantom one last time.
Let the light of His perfect love shine upon you and your family. Vista Del Rey Bible College invites you to worship at the church of your choice this Sunday.
Things were okay again, and none of us ever saw that night coming. There hadn't been any more strange incidents at the Viceroy since the night Lottie was murdered. Mrs. Geary didn't bother with her offerings anymore, and new tales of local ghosts and ghouls took the Phantom's place. There were even some sick fucks who now said that Lottie's ghost was now haunting the drive-in, and her not even cold in her grave yet. What is wrong with people? A new guy was hired to replace Lottie for the remainder of the summer. So I worked the concessions register with Christine, Darcy, and the new guy made snacks. Sheriff's deputies stopped patrolling the grounds after about 2 weeks, so we were back to just having Raoul again. It was a double feature night. Our top billed picture for the night was G.I. Joe, Rise of Cobra, and Drag Me to Hell was the second feature. Business was steady. It was probably going to be our last busy weekend before school started back up. Then, sometime after 11, around the intermissions, the power completely went out.
Everything was pitch black. Even the street lamps on the highway had gone out. Like the whole grid we were on went down. People started honking their horns and switching on their headlights. Some wise guys kept flashing their high beams. There weren't a lot of windows in the concession stand, so even then it was ridiculously dark. Raoul tried his best to keep everyone calm, but
he was just pissing in the wind. That crowd, especially since it was a crowd jazzed up to see a horror picture next, got wild. I called out to Christine, who had been right beside me before the power outage, but got no response. Then Darcy and the new kid started calling for her. Raoul's spidey sense must have tingled because he busted in with his daddy's police flashlight and froze when he saw his girl was missing. And then we saw, sitting on the counter next to the bag of popcorn that Christine had just filled, a single red rose.
I yelled at someone to call the sheriff's office and then took off running to where Christine's car was parked. I saw them, but just for a moment. The Phantom had Christine thrown over his shoulder. She fought the best she could, but he had a good hold on her, and I knew he was stronger than he looked. Within seconds, they disappeared among the trees, and without a second thought, I ran in after them. I found Christine at sunrise in a little clearing. There were no signs of violence on her, aside from the wounds you'd get from being snatched up and dragged through dense woods. She was unconscious until paramedics had a look at her, but was otherwise unharmed. Well, you can read the rest in Daddy's police report.
I love the grass whereon.
I don't remember anything after that. I remember the lights going out at the Viceroy, and then waking up in the ambulance, but that's about it.
I love my love, and well she knows.
That police report was pure horse shit. It didn't even include the statements they took from me, Darcy, and Mrs. Geary. It didn't happen the way that the Honorable Sheriff Joe Butch Devlin would have us all believe.
I don't remember where the Phantom took me, or what happened when we got there. But I began to have strange dreams about him for weeks after that. Well, they haven't stopped, the dreams. They've just become a lot less frequent. In the dream, he was unchanged from the last time I saw him. Same patchwork coat, same slicked back hair, and same rough-hewn wooden mask spray-painted golden to reveal only the lower half of his weathered face. He took me deep into those woods, the woods that folks call Hangman's Grove, to a little clearing.
After finding Christine in the woods, rumor has it the sheriff was so pissed off that he rounded up some deputies and other concerned citizens to do some extrajudicial manhunt for the Phantom.
He rounded up an old-time posse of off-duty cops, truck drivers, and farmhands to find the Phantom and lynch his ass. Can you believe that shit? That police are doing that in the 21st century?
The Phantom had a little nest there, a campsite, I suppose. There were several tarps and canvas sheets strung out and tied to trees to form a tent of sorts. In the dream, the Phantom had covered it with pine boughs to camouflage it. There was a crude religious altar, a shrine of sorts, all made up from whatever he could find in the forest. Twigs, roots, vines, and whatever trash he could scavenge from the Viceroy, including Mrs. Geary's offerings.
Voodoo shit. He made all these weird voodoo dolls and shit out of drive-in movie theater trash to do some kind of weird devil worship ceremonies with it.
He showed me every detail of his altar, objects that were sacred to him. And then he spoke to me in my dream.
He couldn't speak. Not really. Not English anyways. They say he could only mumble words in this made-up language because he never lived around people. Like that one Jodie Foster movie. He was feral, like a caveman.
He said, "I have waited lifetimes to find you." He pointed to the altar, and now I could see a figurine whittled from a chunk of pine, about the size of a baby doll. And he would cradle it in his arms like a baby. And then he passed it to me, and I also held it like a baby. Here, in the crook of my arm. The Phantom didn't say what it was, but my dream self knew it was a demon, or a goddess. The longer I looked at her, the more she would resemble me. Sometimes I'd dream this dream, and she'd always look like me, and other times she'd always look like the demon goddess. My whole self was staring back at me in the guise of a monster. Her horns twisted and spiraled like a jagged crown atop her head. And when she wasn't being held, we'd place her in a bed of rose petals. Roses, like the gifts he would leave for me. She had a tail, like a rat's tail, and her claws held what looked like a skull and a sword.
And then they beat him and made him watch while they burned all of his shit to the ground.
I would ask the Phantom in my dreams why the figurine looked like me. He took my hands, and as I looked into his eyes, I realized they weren't just dark. They were as black as the woods around us, inhuman and otherworldly, eyes that contained an empty cosmos. He spoke to me with a deep voice, an ancient voice, and he would say, "You are the mother of the apocalypse, the bringer of a new age, and together We will finally bring this world to its knees, just as we would have done in elder days. For your true name is And that's where the dream always ends. I never hear what his name for me is before I wake up. Something that starts with a V. Pretty silly, I guess.
Black, black, black is the color of my true love's hair.
I imagine how he must have cried. This was his world. This was his deity. Seeing it all burnt down like that would have been like watching them murder his god. Everything that happened after that was pure speculation. Whatever they did to him was the last anyone ever saw of him. I heard they loaded him in fishing boat in the early hours of the morning, chained him to some cinder blocks, and drowned him in the deepest part of Lake Castillo.
I love my love, and well she knows.
That's not how I heard it. I heard they found the bloody wire he'd used to strangle Lottie with, and they bound his hands with it, and then executed him. Blew a hole in him with a shotgun, and then they buried the body where nobody would find him. I mean, shit. This was Sheriff Devlin we're talking about. If anyone went looking for a body, he'd have to be the one to send them.
Rosie's Rag Patch is a proud sponsor of the Viceroy Drive-In. Bring your ticket stub into any Rosie's Rag Patch location to receive a free gift.
The town got back to normal. The phantom faded out of recent memory and into legend. The Viceroy Drive-In went out of business the very next year. Turns out they just couldn't compete with the big multiplex that moved into Rey Market Plaza. I got my degree a couple years later, and I was hired on as a vet tech at an animal hospital next door to a boutique owned by Raoul's aunt. And then, of course, Raoul and I got married shortly after that.
They had a beautiful wedding. I don't think I've ever seen so many roses.
Last summer, I was out for a little hike, and I decided to walk out towards Hangman's Grove. The trees out there were just as dense as ever. Then I came across this odd little clearing, like the phantom's nest from my dreams. I sat on an old stump to do a sketch in a little notebook I'd brought with me. And then I saw it, jutting out from the ground like an old tree root.
I don't see Christine and Raoul much these days. I mean, I see them around town and we say hi, but it's not like we were ever close friends after that summer. She and Raoul have been married for a while now. They seem happy, but I hear they've been trying to have kids for a while now and, well, they've had a hard time with it.
I guess that lost clearing isn't lost at all. I'm just the only one who seems allowed to find it, just as I was allowed to find this figurine in the ground. It's the one from the shrine, the one from my dream, and she's still smiling that evil smile, terrible and beautiful as a siren. Raoul doesn't know it, but I keep her in a little hat box under the bed. Some nights, she whispers to me in my sleep, whispers my name, whispers her name for me. But I can never make it out, just the V sound at the beginning. That was about 14 or 15 weeks ago.
I guess this is as good of a place to announce it as any. We just found out that Christine and I are finally getting to have a baby. We are very excited to be parents. We already have names picked out. If it's a boy, we're going to name him Eric, after her grandfather. If it's a girl, we're going to name her Rose, after my Aunt Rosie.
I'll suffer death 10,000 times.
Yum, yum. Sizzling hot dogs, topped with Castleberry's chili, now being served at the snack bar. The Phantom of the Viceroy Drive-In, starring YouTube's Lady Vengeance, as Christine, Carissa Vikis, Beauty Unlocked Podcast as Meg, JT Hosack, Brew Crime as Raul, Keely, Misty Mysteries Podcast as Darcy, and narrated by Edward October. Stick around after the credits for a brief word from some of our fellow indie podcasters, creators, and friends. There may even be some bloopers, outtakes, and bonus content as well. You have been listening to Octoberpod. Octoberpod is produced, edited, and directed by Edward October. The series co-producers are MJ McAdams and Amber Jordan. Logo and banner graphics by Jessica Good. Edward October character design by Nick Calavera. Select still photography courtesy of unsplash.com. Select music cues by Dr. Dreamchip and various other stock music and sound effects courtesy of freesound.org. Music from Bigfoot Apocalypse and Thorax, theme from Octoberpod, composed by Nico Vitezi. All other images, music, and FX cues, except where noted, are sourced from within the public domain. Follow us on YouTube at Octoberpod Home Video, on Instagram, and the app I still call Twitter at Octoberpod VHS, and on TikTok and Blue Sky at Octoberpod. Or find us and all of our links on the World Wide Web at OctoberpodVHS.com. For business inquiries or story submissions, email octoberpod@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this program, we'd be very pleased if you told your friends about us. And while you're at it, write us a 5-star or equivalent review wherever you're listening. The man who spoke to you was Mr. Edward October.
Are you looking for a movie podcast with deep dives, interviews, and thoughtful film analysis?
We ain't got none of that. What do we got?
You want to hold the bucket?
Right, I'll hold the bucket, sit in the cuff chair.
There with I will never blink. I'll just be there holding the bucket.
I will never blink on her drapes, most likely. You look like a drape. R.I.P. That sweet, sweet pussy. It is known that Jessica Tandy had the sweetest pussy in Hollywood.
If you don't know, Google it. Don't Google Jessica Tandy's pussy, you guys. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Doom Generation. Available anywhere you find podcasts.
Listen up, true crime fans. I have a podcast that you won't want to miss. A heartfelt show that focuses on lesser-known crimes from around the globe called Our True Crime Podcast.
All right, buckle up, I guess. We
All
gotta
right,
put our
ready?
seatbelts on. We gotta go.
Every week, hosts Jen and Cam will guide you through a new case backed up by meticulous research and delivered with the utmost respect for victims and survivors. Cases like the fatal exorcism of Joan Vollmer.
Yes, eyes can turn red and appear to glow from increased adrenaline and blood flow.
I did not know that.
And the Haynes family massacre.
I'm almost afraid to hear it.
As a parent, I don't even know. I don't know.
You'll not only learn about the cases, you'll feel like you're part of a conversation with witty, lifelong friends. That's what truly makes this our true crime podcast. So whether you're a true crime aficionado,
I thought you might say that. I was hoping anyway.
or a casual listener,
That's a baseball team, Jen, if you didn't know.
Oh, I figured it was some kind of sports ball thing.
sit down and join us for our true crime podcast. Listen on your favorite podcast apps today.
It's a Sunday. I'm sitting in a dark, dark room talking to my best buddy about
Crime.
That's right.
When you're alone in your house, but you'd like to feel like you're not, the podcast inside your house can keep you company. Our show will make sure that you run up the stairs at night when you turn off the lights and check under your bed before you sleep. We'll fill your dreams and nightmares with bizarre birds, creepy crawlers, and heroic hitmen. We'll have you pulling back the shower curtain just in case, and side-eyeing your closets as you walk past them. We'll bring you everything from the classics that you know and love to the strange and often silly world of creepypastas. We've even got some stories written just for the show that you won't hear anywhere else. So go check out the podcast inside your house. We're on all major platforms, as well as inside your pantry, your crawl space, and sitting at the foot of your bed at night, watching you sleep.
Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3. Apple, Baker, Charlie.
To make your back-to-school shopping trip a breeze. Pop into Rosie's Rag Patch to buy the latest fashions and accessories to give your kids the fresh new look this school year.
The ghosts are beginning to stir now. This graveyard on the hill is beautiful. This graveyard on the hill. Fuck you. What? What?
Captain Demeter? Nope, that's Captain... Is it right? Captain Demeter? Yep. Look at me go.
Looks like school's back in session, boys.
Receive 10% off your aria.
Summer flings and heartbreaks. Summer flings and heartbreaks flew past us while we...
Or receive 20% off. Did I say that right? Let me say that again. Receive 10% off your Aria Burger combo meal with your purchase of with your purchase of a Clapper Keeper or lunchbox from Spunkmeyer's Pharmacy.
Well, school is back in session. The school is, yes. Well,
looking for school supplies? Spunkmeyer's Pharmacy has all the gear you need to Spunkmeyer's Pharmacy has all the gear you need to put you at the head of the class. Spunkmeyer's has the largest selection of Clapper Keeper brand binders, lunchboxes, and thermoses in Greene County. Choose from your favorite cartoon and comic strip characters, including Nutso, Captain Demeter. Damn it.
Now back to the graveyard. Fuck.
I read this to my husband and he was laughing. He's like, I've never heard of any of these brands. And I'm like, of course you haven't, because it's made up.
And Mom worries just a little bit more about the straps being able... Fuck you.
This year, make Rey Market Plaza. Bleh.
And cheese sauce. With spicy jalapenos and queso quesadilla cheese sauce.
Limited 1 per customer. Proof of purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Blah, 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 blah. Limit 1 per customer. Proof of purchase necessary. Void where prohibited.
Smooth. Creamy.
Okay. I think that's it for today.